What about the roughly 30 to 40% of households in the US that have like virtually no holdings of stocks? In this melt up scenario, those people are getting left behind, at least on a relative basis. Maybe their income is better, maybe their wages are better because there is more activity happening in the US, but we don't really want this system where the S&P is pumping by like 15% per year. That's not really a good sustainable system. So, and that brings up another interesting point, which is like, how would a Trump administration deal with that? And I'm not really sure I know the answer. I know how a left wing administration would deal with it. They'd say tax the wealthy, redistribute it, do these things of like, they said, we'll give you this much money for a down payment on a home. Yeah, stimulus check type of stuff. I agree with the incentives or the motivation. I don't agree with those policies being very good, but I'm not really sure what a Trump administration would say if the bottom 40% feels like they're being left behind in this melt up scenario. What does a Trump administration do? I'm not really sure. I don't have a high conviction view on that.
I think he's the best job in, or the best guy for this job in this situation at that time being. Like you said earlier, you alluded to, if he won 4 years ago, things would be very different. Like you said, Elon, like all these things would not have happened. People would have not have come. People say like, oh, we need to come together as a society, or you need to have you always hear like the bipartisan, we got to be, bring people together and have a bipartisan coalition. Wake up and smell the coffee. And there's a bunch of Democrats. I mean, you got, the Joe Rogans of the world, the Elon Musk, the Russell Brands, the Tulsi Gabbards, the RFKs. They're all there. They're in the administration. I mean, they're doing things together now. I've never seen anything like it. And so you have this coming together because of the last 4 years, because of what the country went through. Do but again, at the same time, to your point, and some of what we've been talking about, he was also the guy suggesting negative interest rates, right? I mean, what was this? Was that 4 or 5, 6 years ago? I can't remember exactly when that was, but he was the guy, to your point of like, hey, I think it's going to kind of keep going this direction. He was the guy the only person I know of really in America so far, at least at that level, that suggested negative interest rates, which is a whole, another topic for a different day, I guess we can touch on it. But you have that. What do you think though? And again, we're prognosticating, which is, I guess, our job and your job to do in a sense, and the things that we're studying. But what do you think, like what would go up in prices? What would go down? Because yeah, I feel like you're going to have this divergence and this, not bilocation. That's you being in two places at once. Like we're, like Padre Pio or something. But I'm trying to think, it's just like a divergence of prices almost, where you said like asset prices go up. There's got to be some prices that are coming down, right? Like if you have technology, these growth, if it's nuclear, I mean, nuclear, you can't just like start it up right now. But in your mind, what do you think that there could be? It just feels like you're going to have, which I guess is always the true, but you're always going to have prices, in different places going different directions. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of this off the top of my head, and just makes me think of so many different things. I don't know if you have any thoughts on any of that stuff, but I think it is important to just kind of reflect on what he is and what he isn't, and the people that he has together now, like you alluded to. We haven't seen anything like it, and it's going to be a growth world. So do with that what you may, I guess.
Yeah, I think pursuing growth for sure is high up on Trump's priority list. And he's a real estate developer, so, and you mentioned the interest rates, right? Like he talked about negative interest rates. As a real estate developer, they love low interest rates in general. Borrow, finance a project, build, get people in, develop an area. That's their MO. And I think that's how Trump thinks. So, that's a polar opposite world from, hey, inflation's running hot. Let's jack up interest rates, Paul Volcker style, and, nip this inflation thing in the bud. That like, Trump does not want that at all. Now, on the flip side, what might be constraining him a little bit is I think he's well aware that he does not want a repeat of what happened under the Biden administration, where pretty much all of the country is just looking at prices and saying, oh my gosh, this is what it just cost me to fill up my tank. Oh my gosh, this is what it cost me to go to the grocery store, go to the same restaurant, smaller portions, higher prices. Like people are just seeing it everywhere, buying stuff for their kids, going to the dry cleaner. All of this stuff is just, shooting up in price. I think Trump is well aware that he does not want that scenario to happen. So how does he deal with that? I think it is just touting all of the things he's doing for the country as a whole. And he probably looks at things much more on a real basis than a nominal basis, I would think. So in his world, I think he's banking on wages for the lower cohort of wealth to go up more than whatever CPI is printing. So if CPI prints, 5 to 6, I think Trump is banking on the fact that in his world, wages are going to go up at least 5 or 6, maybe more. And he'll say, sure, CPI printed 5 or 6, but look at all these amazing things I did. Look at these factories. Your wages are going up, blah, 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 blah. I think that's how he gets around it. But we'll find out in a year. I think we are going to find out because in my mind, it is really low likelihood that we see inflation at 2% for years and years in a row.
What do you think, like MicroStrategy, for instance, like is Saylor?
Yeah, I think Saylor will continue to be a unique player in the Bitcoin for corporation space because they're like, their legacy software business, enterprise software business, it exists. They have clients, they have revenue, but it's a tiny fraction of how much Bitcoin they own, and Bitcoin going from 70 to 80. Whatever, additional value that is giving to MicroStrategy, that's just dwarfing whatever their enterprise software business could do, right? So like for all intents and purposes, it's a Bitcoin holding company. And Saylor has said this himself too, because I think he's been asked a similar question. He's like, do you think other companies are going to copy MicroStrategy? And his point is it's almost impossible for them to do it because they would have to kind of leave. But they can keep their legacy business, but it would have to be so small in comparison to how much Bitcoin they buy. If Apple buys $1 billion worth of Bitcoin, that's a big number, $1 billion. But when you compare it to how much cash Apple has, how much additional revenue and earnings and cash flow that they do every year, $1 billion is actually pretty small. So Apple could buy $1 billion worth of Bitcoin. That doesn't make them a Bitcoin holding company, right? Like most of the stock performance is still going to be dependent on how Apple does as a company. So that's, I think companies will buy Bitcoin as protecting the cash that they've already drawn into their business. That's going to happen for sure, but they're not going to become like new MicroStrategies because they have existing businesses that just, dwarf however much Bitcoin that they could buy. Now, that does raise the question, could a small company kind of play the MicroStrategy playbook? And the answer is yes, absolutely. But if a small company is doing it, then, they're not going to be, if you've seen charts about MicroStrategy trading volume, MicroStrategy options activity, it's massive in the TradFi world, convertible debt that they've issued. So some small company could do a version of what MicroStrategy is doing, but they're not going to get to where MicroStrategy is. So I think MicroStrategy is kind of like a really unique entity in this sense, in terms of specifically what they're doing. But if we're just talking about companies buying Bitcoin and putting it on their balance sheet, that's going to happen for sure. And the big one is Microsoft. They have a December 10th shareholder vote where one of the explicit items is should they hold Bitcoin as an asset on their balance sheet. I don't really have a strong view on whether that will pass or not because I just haven't looked into all the dynamics. If anything, I would probably bet it doesn't pass because I don't know if they're incentivized enough to do it. They're one of the most valuable companies on planet Earth. I don't know if they've gotten all the buy-in from people to do it yet. Maybe they'll surprise me and they'll do it, but anyway, if it doesn't happen December 10th, I think those big cash generating American tech companies will be buying soon, but they're not going to, it's not the same dynamic as MicroStrategy is what I'm trying to say.
When does it, in your mind, is it 100,000? Is it 1 million? Like when do people start really being like, wow, like I was wrong. Like this is something else. This is different. I mean, do we ever get to that point? Like, what do you think? Like when you go down this road?
If you want the answer to that question right there, and you like that spicy clip, check it out here. Come on, we'll see you in there. But if you want the full interview in its entirety, all the spicy clips put together, and you're not going to want to miss it, believe me, then check that out here. Come on, we'll see you in there. Good luck.